are going to give us a presentation about health and justice commissioning for liaison and diversion. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for the opportunity and the invitation. Much of today's session will be carried out by my colleague Rupi, who is the Direct Commissioner for Liaison and Diversion Services, and hopefully, well, I know he will be very informative and give a lot of information. I suppose I really just wanted to introduce the session and just take the opportunity to advise those on the call about who Rupi and I are, what services we commission, and how we fit into the wider landscape. So I'm the Head of Health and Justice for the South East region, and within that remit we have the responsibility for commissioning all health services to the prisons, immigration removal centres, secure children's homes, secure training centres, sexual assault referral centres, and liaison and diversion services that Rupi is going to talk about in some detail. But I just wanted to make people aware of the whole remit of services that we do, and we report directly into the Director of Specialised Commissioning, Mental Health Specialised Commissioning, and Health and Justice. So in the South East region, we have pretty much every single type of prison that there are, and that is with the exception of Category A prisons. But we have every other sort of prison. Ranging from east to west, and more prisons than any other NHS region in the country. So we have a large amount of our finances go into commissioning mental health, primary care and substance misuse services for the prison estate. And that's where, as I say, an awful lot of our effort is focused. On top of that, we have 2 immigration removal centres, both of which are located at Gatwick, and there's only 5 or 6 of those in the whole country. 2 secure children's homes in East Sussex, in Sussex, not necessarily in East Sussex, and 1 in Sussex and 1 in Hampshire, I correct myself. And we have a sexual assault referral centres in each of the county areas across the board, of a total of which I think we have 5. But Rupi is more of an expert on those than me as well. And SARCs are really the only element of our commissioning responsibility that is victim focused, as opposed to, I suppose, what we would describe as perpetrator focused. So we kind of like start at the liaison and diversion end of it, and we go all the way through to the end of the custodial process in terms of our health responsibilities. And I'm sure people are aware that involves an awful lot of close working with our partner agencies. The bit that we don't do at the moment, although we do have two trial sites that we're endeavouring to start with, is what we're calling the Reconnect program. The Reconnect program is a piece of work which has been held up somewhat by COVID, but is in the NHS Forward View to try and support individuals upon release from prison into health services, be those substance misuse, mental health, or primary care, to try and prevent the revolving door element of what we're doing, of our client group. Sorry, forgive me, because we do find that we get the same people going through our services time and time again. So the Reconnect service is part of the NHS Forward View. It has been held up. We have got a potential We've got a trial site for the female estate in Surrey through HMP Bronzefield, and also potentially a trial site for HMP Bullingdon in Oxfordshire. But those services have been held up as a result of COVID. But I would just like to tell the group that they are being reinvigorated with some force from a national perspective, because that really is seen as the bit of our circle that needs completing. We're trying to prevent people from a custodial sentence and a career in the criminal justice service through liaison and diversion, but we also need to try and start picking people up as they exit prison slightly better, with some joined up work with our colleagues in probation and CRC, etc. So that's embryonic, but it's quite an exciting area of work that we're moving into. Rupi's here to talk about. Rupi is my commissioner for the Liaison and Diversion Services. So, with fear of not stealing his thunder, I will pass over to him, and he will take you through the purpose and the ethos of our Liaison and Diversion Services that we commission into police custody suites and courts.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for Jason for inviting me on this phone call today. I'm just going to, I've got my camera on at the moment, so hello all. I'm just going to turn it off so I can save on bandwidth and hopefully just improve signal so that you can all hear me. So just going on to what Liaison and Diversion Services actually are. So what you see in front of you, just in terms of that slide, is a strategic overview of what the aims of the service actually is. But it's also important to note that L&D services, it's a national scheme. So these teams will exist in the vast majority of regions around England. And, you know, just in terms of the southeast, we have teams in Kent, Surrey, Sussex, Thames Valley and Hampshire, all being delivered via various different NHS trusts. But as I mentioned, you know, what you see is a strategic overview. But I think what would be useful for the group is just to understand what the operational view of L&D services actually are, and primarily they're based in police custody suites and magistrates' courts, and are tasked with identifying vulnerable clients that would benefit from health and social care interventions. As an example, just picking out one of the regions, Kent, for instance, we currently have teams based within 7 custody suites between the hours of 8 and 8 p.m. And we also cover 6 magistrates' courts in the Kent region between 9 and 5, as well as providing out-of-hours provision where it's needed. In terms of who's eligible for the service, it's anyone who's suspected of committing an offence. And in terms of those referral pathways, the vast majority of our referrals are received from police colleagues or via the L&D teams directly, conducting cell sweeps, and on occasion voluntary assessments where people put themselves forward to be assessed. In terms of staffing mix, we've got a good staffing mix of things like clinical workers, specialist practitioners, women's coordinators, youth coordinators, peer-to-peer support workers, outreach workers, and apprentice workers. And as a team, you know, they all kind of come together to, again, you know, to really emphasize identifying the most vulnerable individuals within custody suites in order to screen and triage those individuals and identify what the issues are, and then for the teams to work on referring onto more specialist interventional providers within the community. And to kind of give you an indication of capacity, and again, kind of using Kent as an exemplar, between April and June of this specific year, 3,800 people were arrested via the police during the hours of 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And the L&D team itself saw approximately 3,000 of those individuals were offered an L&D assessment. from those kind of offer of assessments, we saw in a region of 2,250 clients who consented to a full assessment of need, identifying vulnerabilities and so forth. As I mentioned, once we actually kind of identify that vulnerability, it's for the teams to refer on to more kind of appropriate support mechanisms within the community. Also mentioned previously, we're also based within the courts and work very closely with our probation colleagues in order to identify those vulnerabilities through our screening services, but also just to provide vulnerability reports to our probation colleagues so they can be presented to magistrates throughout the region itself. Sarah, could you move on to the next slide, please? So just in terms of eligibility criteria, the thing I really wanted to point out in terms of this particular slide is it's any person over the age of criminal responsibility 10 who is suspected of having committed a criminal offence will be eligible for the service. But the service itself, will conduct an assessment to identify vulnerabilities associated with things such as substance misuse, homelessness, benefits, finance and debt problems, physical health, domestic and sexual violence, education, training and employment needs, social isolation, and mental health needs. And when we kind of discuss mental health needs, it's a range of needs, that could be in relation to depressive illnesses, acquired brain injury, anxiety issues, schizophrenia, personality disorders, dementia, and so forth. But as you can see, just in terms of the third bullet point, those are the individuals that the evidence base suggests are most appropriate to be kind of seen by the L&D service. But I must stress that that list is not an exhaustive list. It's anyone that has a vulnerability that we're trying to identify in terms of the service itself. Sarah, moving on to the next slide. So exclusions. Once we identify a vulnerability, we're very much reliant upon other providers, other commissioned providers. And again, my mind kind of runs to things like substance misuse providers who are commissioned via the local authorities and CCGs, domestic and sexual violence services that might be commissioned via the PCC's office. We also kind of refer on to GPs, homelessness services, obviously, community mental health teams, and so forth. But when we're discussing exclusions, those exclusions are predominantly made based upon the fact that we're not trying to duplicate services. So where we have things like removal and detention of an individual in accordance with Section 136 of the Mental Health Act, within police custody suites, what we also have is AMPs, and those AMPs are controlled by the trusts themselves in relation to other commissioned services. The police will also have their own healthcare teams as well, based within the custody suites, and they will undertake things like fitness to detain, fitness to interview, and pre-release risk assessments. So the exclusions are primarily based upon the fact that there's other services that provide these particular interventions. What's also important to note is the custodial in-reach services or post-release services. So yes, while that's an exclusion at the moment, and just touching upon what Nick pointed out earlier, we are looking at things like Reconnect, which is a whole system approach to identifying individuals that are being released from prison and are coming back out into the community and would benefit from interventions. Now, the current thinking, particularly within the Surrey region, where there is a Pathfinder site from Bronzefield, is the fact that we will kind of vary L&D contracts to deliver Reconnect so that we can create a whole system approach, because in essence, what the evidence base is suggesting is the fact that L&D teams would have been the first point of call for a number of individuals in terms of that vulnerability assessment, because those individuals are obviously arrested and do go through the custody suites, but there's that whole criminal justice pathway that they will follow, going to the courts, and if they are convicted, will obviously be incarcerated. So for us, it's a logical conclusion to kind of vary the L&D's contract, simply being because they will still hold information information around those clients once they're released into the community, and can pick up those clients and hopefully have that rapport with those clients in order to address the needs that were originally identified, but also to undertake a further assessment to identify whether there's additional vulnerabilities that have occurred as a result of those individuals being within a prison setting. So that's a work in progress, but one that is in the long-term plan, and one that we're very keen to continue to kind of roll out across the regions. Okay, Sarah, next slide. One of the things I did do is just in relation to, well, being quite specific with this group, is just to request some case studies from my L&D teams across the patch, and I've included a couple of case studies in terms of the slides here. I won't necessarily read through the case studies, but if I just give you all an opportunity, 20-30 seconds just to go through, and then we can move on to the next case study, at which point I'll kind of take any questions and clarify any points that you may need. Sarah, shall we move on to the next case study? That's great. So over to the group. Was there any questions or clarification points that anyone needed? I think for just to from our perspective, particularly my kind of opinion, one of the things I'm quite keen to do is to ensure the fact that we have effective pathways in place with our homeless colleagues, but with all of our kind of support and community providers. So it's kind of imperative that we do raise the profile of L&D services, and hopefully today is a good kind of basis to start those conversations. But just going over to questions, I think there's a couple hands up. Sorry, I can
help you with this, Rupi. So Jackie's got a question first of all. What's the skill mix of the team providing the Liaison and Diversion service?
So it's a number of different skills mix. So we employ individuals that do have that mental health background. We employ social workers, substance misuse workers. So it's a real mix, a clinical background in terms of nursing and so forth. We also encourage individuals that have lived experience to be part of the team. We're developing peer-to-peer support mechanisms on an ongoing basis. So it's a really good mix. But just in terms of, I suppose, specifically for this group, one of the things that we also do insist upon is an understanding around homelessness legislation, whether that be, well, it's at a minimum of one particular worker within the team itself. And again, it kind of goes back to the assessment process. We insist upon it simply being because there needs to be that understanding so that we are able to advocate and create those effective partnerships with our homeless colleagues.
That's great. Thank you for that. I've got a couple of hands up. I think, Sarah, I saw your hand go up first. Go ahead.
Hi, Sarah Jeffrey. I'm the commissioning officer for one of the commissioning officers at Hampshire Adults Health and Care, and I commission the homelessness hostels across Hampshire in partnership with the districts. I'm just wondering how far your assertive outreach team is already linked in with the street outreach workers that are either commissioned by HCC or our local district partners, because obviously some of the people that you will pick up in custody have already had contact with those outreach teams if they've been sleeping rough, and actually those people may know have a lot of information, and I'm just wondering where those partnerships are at the moment.
Okay, so I think I couldn't answer that specifically, but that's certainly something I can take away, Sarah, and ensure the fact that we aren't duplicating services. I think is my main concern in the first instance, but just to ensure the fact that there is that effective communication pathway, because yes, we do have outreach workers in the Hampshire site, and again, it just goes back to my earlier point around the fact that we need to ensure that we're working with all responsible teams within that particular area, but couldn't, as I mentioned, answer specifically. But if I take your details, Sarah, I'm certainly happy to get back to you.
Lovely, that'd be great. I mean, what I'll do, if we can link up, and obviously I can give you the right contacts for the Hampshire area, because I think that's really key, isn't it? Because like I said, I think those teams will have it will be the same client group, and actually they could probably, if you worked together, it's going to get a better outcome for that individual. That'd be brilliant.
No,
Thank you.
Exactly.
That's great.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's great. We can make sure you get those contact details, Rupi, if you don't hear from Sarah.
Colette? Jason, it's Nick. Can I just say, to defend Rupi very quickly, there are two Rupis, one of whom works in Hampshire, Isle of Wight and Thames Valley, and that's not the Rupi that's on the call. So Rupi's about to kind of like take over the whole region, but literally from next week, because that person's moving to the national team. So his Kent, Surrey and Sussex knowledge is a little bit greater, hence why he needs to go away and look that up. So thank you for your patience, Sarah.
No worries. I just absolutely understand. I think this is what these forums are all about, isn't it? So brilliant. Thanks.
Great. Lovely. Making the magic happen. Look at that. Colette, I saw your hand go up, and I've got a couple of questions in the box. So Colette, if you want to say who you are, where you're coming from, and then across to your question, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Colette Levan, and I am the SRO for Prevention of Homelessness and rusting in Surrey County Council. So one of the things we're trying to do is bring together all of our outreach providers into different kinds of forums. But I wondered if we could actually approach your assertive team and invite them along to that meeting.
You can indeed. So in the Surrey region, the assertive outreach team is split between two organisations that we kind of subcontract with through the NHS Trust. But it's Catalyst and Bernardo's that deliver that particular function. If I get you in contact with the service manager, but I don't see that as an issue. Again, I think it's imperative the fact that we do have those links with your teams.
Good. And the other thing is that we meet with the housing needs managers every Monday morning, so that would be a nice introduction from your team to meet with all of them. There's 11 of them.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely.
So I'll email you separately in order to enact that.
Great. Thanks very much. And we've got Debbie. You're introducing it as an unfair question, just to give fair warning. Do you want to give voice to it, Debbie? You're here in the call.
Yeah, I mean, I like hearing about case studies, but I think what I enjoy hearing about more is where people have identified things they could have done differently or lessons they could have learned. So I was just wondering if you could kind of add to those case studies in a way after the meeting and give us some sort of lessons learned or point to where there might have been gaps or strengths or things corrected as a result of looking at those case studies. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll respond to that. I think there's always situations where there can be lessons learned. So one of the things that we do, and I kind of conduct every 2 weeks, is I meet with the service managers to understand where there needs to be additional learning and so forth. So a number of months ago, we identified the fact that, and it goes back to the knowledge around homelessness legislation. So yes, we insist upon it in terms of contract, but I do wonder how up to date that information is sometimes, particularly with the introduction of the Homeless Reduction Act and so forth. So we're looking at those particular training needs to ensure the fact that when we are assessing clients, that we're asking the most appropriate questions, and the fact that our workers do have understanding around things like local connection, priority need, intentionality, and so forth. Not to become housing workers in order to do assessments, but to really be able to advise the client clients that we see within the custody suites. So it's an ongoing piece of work that I'm quite keen to kind of explore across the regions. But I do agree. I think there's always lessons to be learned, but we have that ethos within the services themselves. But I'm quite happy to kind of feed back to you separately, Debbie, to kind of let you know where we have undertaken lessons learned approaches to clients themselves.
That's great, thank you.
Thanks, and I think this looks like a final question from me, Ruby. I can't see any other questions or hands up. I would just be interested to get a sense of what proportion of people that your Liaison and Diversion Services are working with for whom homelessness or insecure accommodation is an issue. And I appreciate you might be kind of more familiar with Kent, Surrey, Sussex, and the South East. But is it a big issue for a lot of people, or just a few? Or
I'd have to go back to the data to clarify that, but it's not a huge issue. Our major concerns around the client base are normally to do with substance misuse and mental health needs. Stating that, it's that hidden homeless population that I'm also quite keen to kind of explore, because yes, we ask the questions in relation to homelessness, and off the top of my head, I think the data indicates that it's only a small minority of individuals that do have a housing situation. But I do wonder whether we're delving deeper into the questioning, and whether we're identifying the hidden homeless, those individuals that are sofa surfing. And so forth. And it goes back to things like, if 40% of our clients have a substance misuse issue, then what the long-term evidence base suggests around the substance misuse population is the fact that there is a high number of homeless clients, and obviously that depends upon your definition of what homelessness actually is. But if one evidence base is indicating that, and we're not necessarily seeing a high number of individuals that are indicating to us the fact that they're homeless, I do wonder whether there's additional work to be done just around the understanding and incorporating things like motivational interviewing. But again, I think some of the difficulties occur with the fact that we are multi-vulnerability assessors, so to speak. So we have obviously a limited amount of time where we are seeing clients, and we're trying to ascertain as many issues as we possibly can with those clients, and then relying upon our community providers to support us around what we identify. But again, I think the lessons learned approach, I'm quite keen to ensure the fact that within all of our key workers, within all of our practitioners within the L&D services, do have a good level of motivational interviewing with clients in order to pick out additional vulnerabilities that we may be missing. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, that's great. It's really helpful. And I guess even if the numbers are small, in some ways that makes the work more challenging, because if you're only seeing them from time to time, then developing a network that works really well, that can be really tricky if you're not in touch with the providers that often. So I really get that. Really appreciate your input this morning. It's been really helpful. Great to hear from both you and Nick. There's another comment there in the chat box from V over in Reading about some potential for co-locating liaison and diversion appointments in the local hostel hub. So I think things like that sound really exciting. A great way of engaging with the service, and really good to see. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And we'll move on at that point. I think it's a really neat link here with the transition framework. So we know, as part of the work that we've just been doing over the last few weeks, we've got the South East Transition Framework supporting transition planning for multiple exclusion homelessness. One of the areas where we're keen to kind of help people to encourage people to use the framework is around links with criminal justice, and I know sometimes that works better than in other places, so it does depend on where you are. So we're wanting to do what we can to support that. We're planning to bring the framework to the attention of local criminal justice boards through our health and justice contacts, both Public Health England and NHS England and Improvement. I know Linda's on the line. I saw your name popping up earlier on. Linda, I haven't had a conversation with you. I know about this, so it's putting you a little bit on the spot. But I wonder if you're able to say a little bit about some of the homeless health, some of the health and justice work you've been doing around health and health improvement in Thames Valley area. I appreciate some of that will be pushed to one side around COVID, but have you got some examples of some of the work that we have been doing where we can kind of put health and potentially homelessness on the agenda for criminal justice boards? Linda, are you there? She may be busy with something else. No, okay, well, we'll come back to that. But I was wondering whether anyone's used the transition framework to engage criminal justice partners yet. It fits pretty well with a few of the different principles. We've got the multi-agency partnership collaborative approach. Clearly, it's an issue for people who are homeless. Or any plans to, if anybody's got any plans to use the transition framework with criminal justice partners, wants to share them. We've got Sandra. Go ahead.
Yeah, from Southampton. We've put a call out to public health, adult social care, criminal justice, business sector and our faith sector to join us in a session probably in about 3 to 4 weeks time when everyone get the same date in their diary to go through the transition plan so that we get it from everyone's perspectives. So it's about taking the time, I think, to get everyone on board. We've had some positive responses so far. In the criminal, we're looking at the police, the probation, and what other settings we can get hold of. Yeah,
that sounds great. And of course, a lot of the people that are for whom homelessness is an issue, they'll have often quite short sentences in and out of prison if they are touching the prison at all. But they'll all have a probation contact, won't they, of some sort. Okay. All right, well, if you are using the transition framework locally, it'd be helpful to consider how you can engage with colleagues working in police, probation courts and prisons locally, and your police and crime commissioners. I know that some of you might be in touch through local crime reduction partnerships and so on. So we've got some examples there about bronze, silver and gold. Debbie, you wanted to come in? Debbie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so this was always intended as a sort of document that evolves, wasn't it, Jason? And so if people find that when they're using it with those groups that something else occurs to them, something that might be a better measure of a principle at bronze level or silver or gold, we're asking them to feed back, aren't we? And we wondered whether the criminal justice element could be strengthened a bit, didn't we?
We don't have that many examples in there right now. So if we have got other examples that people are willing to share, and that'd be good to hear. Janet Weeks is saying we've recently taken this to a homelessness strategy group, which has criminal justice, public health, CCG, and so on. Now working on it to take it forward collaboratively. So I think if there are examples of projects that people are working on, or areas where you've engaged with liaison and diversion or other parts of the health and justice system, it would be really good to hear about that, so we can share that within the network and really apply the learning. Okay, grand. Well, I'm going to move on at that point, I think. So thank you very much for that. And I'll move on to the national updates. So the first one is public health.